Good day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Just Fish Outdoors. I'm your host, Dale York, and I designed Just Fish Outdoors to focus on freshwater lakes and streams and to provide information, tips, and techniques, along with how-to segments for catching everything from crappie to catfish. We will also provide tips on equipment, tackle, boating, and much, much more. All of this is aimed at helping you catch more fish and have fun doing it. So join us each week as we talk about my favorite subject, fishing. Today's segment, we're going to talk about probably one of the most important items that any fisherman will deal with. You know, there's basically three pieces of equipment that are the most important, and that's your rod, your reel, and your line. And one of the items that we're going to focus on today is we're going to talk about fishing line. You need to think about this fishing line and how it impacts what you're fishing for, what lures you're throwing, just a myriad of things. Selection of fishing line, in my humble opinion, is probably one of the most important of the three items we just discussed. There's a vast array of selections. There's specialty lines that are designed for specific applications. Our focus this morning will be on fishing lines and line selections. We take the three most used types, and we'll discuss their advantages and disadvantages. And I have in the studio today to help me to do this is I brought back my brother Brian, and we're both well versed in fishing many of these different types of fishing lines in a myriad of different applications. And what we're going to talk about, like I said, we're going to talk about the three most often used, and that'll be monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braid, and we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each. And the first one we'll start off with is monofilament. The first thing that comes to mind in monofilament, of the three that we just talked about, this is probably the most inexpensive, and it's probably the easiest to use as far as putting it on your reel and taking it off your reel, easy to tie a knot. What else comes to mind on mono, Brian?
Well, it's the easiest to manipulate, and like you said, it's definitely the most cost effective for the average angler. Holds knots well, goes on a reel well, and can be bought in various sizes and colors to suit specific applications. Yeah,
it's available in a wide range of different pound ratings and a wide range of colors. Some of its attributes is it has a tendency to float. It's a little buoyant. It also has a tendency to be high stretch. That's another one of its attributes. Of the three that we'll discuss today, one of its disadvantages is it does have the lowest abrasion resistance of the three we'll talk about today under most situations. But as you pointed out, Brian, it's probably the go-to line in a lot of situations. If you're fishing open water situation where you don't need a high abrasion resistance, if you're not fishing in a lot of stumps, you're not fishing in a lot of grass, there are some lures that it actually performs on better. If you're fishing, let's say you're fishing a topwater, or you're fishing some kind of shallow running bait, it performs real good. What other things come to mind, Brian?
Well, you use monofilament, of course, for your topwaters, and what most people don't realize is as you fish with monofilament, it does absorb water. And that is what allows the stretch factor, and therefore is, if you're fishing, say, 20 to 30 feet from where you're at, after that monofilament gets a little water in it, it acts like a shock absorber, almost like your rod. So that, if you do hook a good fish or whatever, not only will that rod, absorb some of the shock, but that's what that monofilament will do. It will stretch a little bit and absorb some of the shock from that fish.
Oh, yeah. We could do a whole show on just rods easily.
Oh, yes, definitely.
These three items we're talking about are what I call the triad, what I call the fishing rod, the fishing line, and the fishing reel. They put together and form the tool, and you can, exchange, mix, or match these different items, and they'll perform differently. This depends on what you're doing, what your specific specification is, or what you're fishing for, in, around, through, whatever, species, cover, water quality, water clarity. All these have an impact, and, in 30 minutes, it's kind of hard to cover all these issues.
It's very difficult to divulge in all of this because there's way more there than time will allow.
Well, most definitely, and basically what we're going to try to do is hit some of the high spots. But we're talking about monofilament, and we've talked about high stretch. If let's say you're throwing a Carolina rig or throwing a heavy lure and you're throwing this maximum length from the boat, say you've got a 6.5, 7.5 foot rod, and you throw this thing, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 yards from the boat or whatever, and you get a bite. When you set the hook, there is a built-in delay between the time that you set the hook and that hook is actually going to move in that fish's mouth. Now, some of this is an advantage. Some of it is a disadvantage. For instance, a lot of the pros, a lot of the guys that fish monofilament a lot like monofilament on a crankbait. There's that built-in delay to where you don't have that raw power to where you jerk those hooks out of those fish's mouth or you tear the hooks out of the fish's mouth. If you're fishing monofilament along with a softer tip rod, like many of us are doing nowadays, so some kind of fiberglass composite rod on crankbaits especially, or fast-moving baits, it's a good combination with monofilament because you have a little bit of shock absorption built into that, not only the line because of its high stretch, but also the rod. So, you're using that combination of line and rod as a giant shock absorber to keep from tearing those hooks out of that fish's mouth. What else do you think, Brian?
Well, you see those guys on TV, those pros on TV, when they're Carolina rig fishing, and they'll set the hook on a fish, and they will literally run from the front of the boat to the back of the boat.
Those are guys fishing monofilament.
There's a reason, folks, why those guys do that. They're trying to get all the stretch out of that line and get buttoned up tight to that fish. It ain't for show or whatever. They're just trying to stay hooked up to whatever it is they got hold of.
Yeah, and like I said, there's some advantages. I mean, monofilament's not my choice when I'm fishing a Carolina rig or something like that, or I'm fishing a long way from the boat with a single hook, whether it be a jig, whether it be a Texas rig, whether it be a Carolina rig. If I'm fishing a single hook, monofilament's not necessarily my line of choice, depending on what rig and some other circumstances. But right now we're focusing on monofilament, and it does have some great advantages. If you're crappie fishing in open water, if you're hybrid fishing, if you're striper fishing in open water, it's really going to be tough to beat monofilament in most applications. And you can select a color that is low visibility to the fish, but at the same time, it's economically viable to use. You can change your lines out fairly regularly on your rod and reels, and it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg.
No, and folks, that's one thing we do recommend is change that line on that reel at a regular basis. That stuff doesn't stay good forever. Try to keep fresh line on your reels, and you'll see a marked improvement in performance of your tackle and the number of fish you catch.
Yeah, and not only change it out, but I mean, every reel has a spec that when that line gets so low on the spool, your performance alters dramatically. I mean, your gear ratios change, your line coming in per inch changes, your distance on your cast changes. There's a lot of things that change when you start losing losing line on the reel and you get it below a certain level. So pay attention to that. Read your owner's manual or ask someone. There's some ways to visibly see that, and you'll also feel the loss of performance. So once again, that's monofilament. It's probably used by more fishermen than any other lines that we'll talk about today. It has a wide variety of applications. It's budget friendly. Definitely
budget friendly.
And you can buy a lot of line for a little bit of money and have lots of spare.
Yeah. I want to touch on one thing. When you guys go out there, you go to the sporting goods dealer or whatever, and you buy a new rod, look down there on the base of that rod, and it'll have a line test rating. And as a general rule, that line test rating is for monofilament.
Yeah, exactly, and you really kind of want to stay within that. It'll have a range. It'll have a low end and a high end. Say 14 to 17 pound line or 15 to 20 or whatever it says on there. Stay within that range, and you won't wind up busting the rod in many cases.
Yes, and your equipment will perform better.
Yeah, that's definitely true. One other thing quickly to point out: if you're purchasing monofilament line, the number one contributor to loss of performance on monofilament line is ultraviolet ray, sunlight. So if you're buying monofilament line, keep it in a dark place. Don't lay it out on the front deck, or don't lay it out on the rock, or don't lay it out on top of the doghouse or whatever.
Yeah.
Keep it in a shaded place, because that will definitely impact the performance of that line. Okay, the second type we're going to talk about is a fairly new line or new chemistry that's only been out on the market a few years, and it's fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbons, what you're going to see in contrast to monofilament is you're going to see it's more expensive. You're going to notice that right up front.
Yeah, you're going to notice that as soon as you pick the box up.
It does have a higher sensitivity level than what monofilament does in most applications. It has a much higher abrasion resistance in most cases. It definitely has a lower stretch than monofilament. What else comes to mind on fluorocarbon, Brian?
Folks, this stuff sinks. Monofilament will float or hang in a water column on you. Fluorocarbon will sink on you, and it is a good choice for fishing deep, fishing crankbaits, jigs, worms. The stuff is fairly tough. It has somewhat, I'm going to say it's probably pretty compatible as far as memory go. Now, what I mean by memory is when you make a cast, basically with a spinning reel, that line will come off there and it looks kind of coily. It looks like an elongated spring, so to speak. We call that line memory. And with monofilament, it goes out fairly quickly, and it goes out fairly quickly with fluorocarbon.
Yeah, monofilament is really, as soon as this starts getting wet, your memory goes away for the length of line you're fishing with.
Right.
And this stuff will do the same thing. What Brian was talking about, it sinks. Yeah, this stuff sinks like a rock, folks. If you're fishing a typical crankbait with the same diameter line and the same specific crankbait that you're fishing on these two different lines, monofilament and fluorocarbon, what you'll find on fluorocarbon typically is your crankbait may go a foot to 3 foot deeper fishing fluorocarbon than what it will run at fishing monofilament, and that's just because this fluorocarbon likes to sink. It's much heavier than water, and it doesn't absorb water, but it's much heavier than water, and it will sink like a rock. One of the properties, or probably one of the properties that has really brought this line to the forefront in recent years is it basically has the same reflective quality as water. So when you're fishing clear fluorocarbon and you chunk that lure in the lake, line to the fish's eye basically disappears.
Yeah.
It has zero visibility.
Yeah,
almost.
It becomes invisible almost.
And so that's one of the situations that you really want to keep in mind. For instance, for you guys who are fishing maybe some of the lakes out of state, like your Bull Shoals, Table Rock, some of you trout fishermen that are fishing some of these, like in the White River chain or a Tennessee chain or something like this. Folks, when you go over and start fishing for fish in these type of situations, especially where you have high sunlight, blue bird days. This fluorocarbon will mean the difference between you catching fish and not catching fish.
Definitely.
I mean, it can be that critical, and it is that good. So, you definitely want to keep that in consideration when you're fishing for instance, if you're fishing for bass that are in a very high traffic lake where they receive a lot of pressure and it's during the day, once again, this fluorocarbon can mean the difference between you getting bit and not getting bit. It is that good. It's not a good all-around line in some cases like monofilament is. It's more expensive. It's a little stiffer. It doesn't have the supple flexibility that monofilament has in most cases. It's just a little stiffer, so in some cases it's just not as good of an application. It's not a good topwater application because it sinks. If you're running a spinnerbait and you're running it high, it's not a good application because it'll drag your spinnerbait will actually run deeper. What else comes to mind, Brian?
Well, I'm the catfish guru of the family, and for all you guys out there that bank fish a river or whatever, fluorocarbon is not a good choice for the simple reason that it does sink. You throw a bait out there in a hole or whatever, and if you're fishing with monofilament, that line will be at an angle to your rod tip. With fluorocarbon, the belly of that line will actually settle to the bottom of the lake or to the bottom of the river, and it's nothing but hang-up city. So, it's not a good choice for that. However, this time of year especially, it is my line of choice when I am crappie fishing in a dock.
Yeah, because that jig, especially if you're fishing lighter jigs, because that line does sink and stay down. In some cases, depending on your rod again, this is kind of where you got to match your rod to your line and your conditions. But would you agree, Brian, that you can actually be a little more sensitive to a bite with fluorocarbon than you could with monofilament?
Oh, yeah, especially if you got a little wind blowing. A lot of times when you get a little wind blowing, you get surface current that comes through the well of these crappie docks. And that fluorocarbon, it being heavier and denser, it will cut that surface current and keep that little bit of bow out of your line.
Yeah, keep that belly out of it.
And it'll keep you in direct contact with that jig. And, a lot of times that'll make a difference between you knowing that fish is there and not knowing that fish is there.
Yeah, they don't have to jerk that belly out of the line before you know you got a bite. So that's a very good point, especially as the water continues to get colder and we fish lighter and lighter and lighter jigs.
And deeper and deeper and deeper.
So that will, yeah, and deeper and deeper. Deeper. That definitely plays an impact, folks. That pretty much takes care of fluorocarbon. It has some advantages over monofilament, but it has some disadvantages. And the third most line that we'll talk about is the so-called super lines or the braided lines. Of the three that we've discussed today or will discuss today, it is the most expensive, pretty much. There's basically zero stretch on this stuff.
No.
It is buoyant, so if you're fishing something deep and fishing a Carolina rig, it may not be the best choice. It's extremely visible to fish. Fish can see this a long ways away. So that's something you always need to be careful of. It does have the greatest sensitivity and is the most sensitive of the three lines, of the other two lines we discussed. Folks, I've been fishing braid since the 90s, since it first hit the market in certain applications. For those of you who've listened to my show before, me and a friend of mine, Randy Claiborne of Lake Fork, Texas Spots app, we fish Lake Fork a lot, and we night fish it. We have nothing but braided line on our rods. we don't even own any monofilament in the boat when we go down there.
Yeah,
so.
when you go down there, it's literally manned bass combat, folks.
Yeah,
it's down and it's dirty.
You got to cinch up the belt and go play with the big boys down there, and you got to have the equipment and the line to do it with, and that is the weapon of choice, no doubt. You can actually fish this stuff and get good enough. Folks, I can tell when I'm
crawling over a rock or I'm crawling over a piece of brush. I can tell if it's a hard bottom or I can tell if it's a soft bottom. That's how good you can get with this stuff with the right rod, the right line, the right number of hours fishing this stuff. It's it can be a pain in the butt. There's a lot of pluses and a lot of minuses of this line, but in certain applications, if you're going after big fish and heavy cover in off-water conditions or low-light conditions, this is the line of choice, no doubt about it.
Oh, no, definitely no doubt about it. Folks, you fish with this stuff, like he said, you're fishing heavy cover, you're fishing low light or at night, especially for you shallow water fishermen that like to flip and pitch in the springtime and that off-colored water up in the back end of them pockets and stuff for those spawn and pre-spawn fish. As a general rule, this is the way it goes. You get by, you jerk, you hook the fish will come to the boat. There ain't no, it's literally come here, I'll play with you after I get you in the boat.
Back in the 90s, I'll share a little story with you here. I first started fishing, Berkeley first came out on the market with a line they called Ultramax, and this was back in the 90s, and it was a copolymer line. It was one of the first super braids that come out. And this stuff was, to us, fish and fork. It was better than sliced bread. We immediately started catching fish that were busting 20 and 25 like it wasn't even there.
It's like running around in a shock boat.
and I was fishing one of our local lakes, and I don't remember which one. I think it was Hominy City Water Lake up there in Hominy. And I was actually pitching jigs behind the dock, over the dock, getting a bite and actually jerking the fish over the dock.
Yeah.
I was jerking 2 and 3 pound fish over the dock to the boat with this stuff. It allows you to do some things that maybe you really shouldn't do.
Yeah,
but
you'll find yourself pitching a bait into places that before you would look at it and go,
Yeah, about the only thing you're missing with this line is a big red S on your chest.
That's pretty much it right there.
But you got to have the right rod too. This stuff can really be rough on rods if you don't pay attention and get a little too robust with it. So remember that as well. That's where that 3 combination, that triad I talk about. It's great to have all this power and have all this sensitivity and have all this brute force, but you got to have a rod that'll back it up.
Yeah, there's nothing like setting a hook and hearing fireworks.
Yeah, it can be a little rough on rods if you're not careful. So you have to be a little mindful of that. You don't need the big powerful hook set with this line. You just need to be quick. There's a difference between quick and power. Okay, you don't have to run from the front of the boat to the back end of the boat to set the hook on a fish with this stuff. You just have to be quick. A good snap of the wrist, if you've got sharp hooks, and you're done. You set the hook right there.
Yeah. I don't care if that fish is 40, 50 feet away from you.
It don't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter a bit. Any closing things you'd like to say, Brian, on these 3 lines before we?
Well, we've touched on the 3 big ones. Starting with braid first, I would say probably about the biggest enemy of braid is rocks. Folks, I don't know what it is about rocks, but rocks and braid do not get along.
Yeah, it cuts it.
It literally eats it up.
Yeah.
And so keep that in mind when you're fishing this stuff. If you're fishing an impoundment or a river or whatever that's rocks, sand, gravel type stuff, stick with your monofilament or stick with your fluorocarbon. Leave the braid for the dense heavy cover and apply these lines where they work the best, and I think we've pretty well covered that, and you'll have success.
Yeah, it's once again, it's like a guy in his tool chest. If you open that tool chest and pick the right tool, it can really make a difference in how many fish you put in the boat and how smoothly your day goes.
Oh yes.
So these lines are designed for specific applications. They'll work in many applications. So think about that, and give a little bit of forethought when you're getting ready to go fishing as to what circumstances you might encounter, and you'll be good.
I want to touch on one thing, folks, for you crappie fishermen out there that like to get over a brush pile or whatever or get in a dock. braid does well crappie fishing, but I'm going to give you a little insight here. Do not do the traditional knit and purl with this braid. Your hands get wet, and this braid it'll slice your fingers in a heartbeat, folks. So, keep that in mind. And, you bass fishermen out there, carry a dowel rod or something with you to break that line with when you get hung up.
Yeah, folks, like I said, be careful out there and use some of these tips, and I think they'll help you catch more fish and put more fish in the boat. If you'd like to know more about Just Fish or anything we can do to help, just drop us a line. Just Fish Outdoors, justfish.com. Folks, get out and enjoy one of the many lakes or streams we're blessed to have. Thanks for listening. Brian, thanks for coming on the show today.
Contact us at justfishoutdoors@justfish.com, or also catch us on our Facebook page, Just Fish Outdoors. This is Dale York, Just Fish Outdoors, saying we'll catch you later.